Hi, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the sixth installment of Remaining Home in Faith, Black, Indigenous, POC, Queer Resilience in Times of Change. My name is Michael Vasquez. My pronouns are he, him, el, and I am the Religion Faith Director of the Human Rights Campaign. This series began as a part of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation's Religion Faith Program's National Faith Tour, an initiative seeking to create common ground between communities of faith and the movement for intersectional LGBTQ justice and equity and liberation. Our virtual continuation of this series has served as a space for prayer and reflection, for storytelling and the exploration of history, so that we might continue to find a way forward even in the face of great uncertainty and tumult. The HRC Foundation's Religion and Faith program is working to build a world where LGBTQ people of faith are celebrated for every part of who they are, while fighting to ensure that religion is not used as a weapon of hate and discrimination. We have had an arduous and toilsome year, and as we continue to navigate the troubled waters of a year that has taken so much from us, demanded so much from us, and continues to summon us to courage and resilience and an unrelenting commitment to the work of creating a just and equal society for all, it is imperative that we lean into practices of radical self-care that nourish our bodies and our spirits and ground us not only in ourselves, but in the long lineage of laborers for justice who paved the way for us and entrusted us with continuing the work of liberation. Radical love of self, care of self, compassion for self allows us to be whole and have longevity in our goal of bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice. As we engage in movement work, it is essential that we create space for our well-being out of respect for our own dignity and humanity, as well as to be effective workers in the pursuit of justice. It is thus my great privilege to introduce Human Rights Campaign President Alfonso David and teacher, author, and lover Lama Rod Owens for a conversation about cultivating resilience, especially for those of us who are LGBTQ and Black, Indigenous people of color, and for community practice of radical self-care. Thank you both.
Michael, thank you so much for that introduction. Lama Rod, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So we are 27 days away from the election of our lifetime, with many people in this country already voting. As we vote, we're also living through a once-in-a-century pandemic, legitimate racial unrest due to the ongoing violence against the Black community, a crumbling economy, a climate crisis, and the list goes on and on. For many people, it feels like we are in the midst of an apocalyptic moment right now. Lama Rod, if you can you tell us where we begin? Where do we begin to understand and address how all of this is impacting our mental health, our bodies, and our spirits?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to first acknowledge that this is a lot that's happening. And it's supposed to be a lot, because when we think about apocalyptic moments are really about unveiling the reality of our lives and introducing us to a truth that maybe it takes some work to be in relationship with, And to begin that work, it's first acknowledging that it's a lot, and secondly, it's committing ourselves to being kind and gentle with this overwhelming data that we're getting about ourselves and about our world, and maybe about structures and systems that we thought were really about ensuring our well-being, but it looks like it's ensuring something else, than our well-being. And we begin with the wrestling, and saying, what my work now is to do this kind of jostling to be in relationship to everything that's happening, because everything that's happening is important for us, because we're shaking loose the things that we no longer need. And that is quite painful. It's deeply heartbreaking as well.
So given that it's so deep and heartbreaking, as you say, let's talk a little bit about how it feels for Black and Indigenous people. So Black and Indigenous people of color have been experiencing suffering for a long time in this country, hundreds of years. And this moment for many exacerbates the suffering that we have been experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
What, in your opinion, makes this moment stand out in the history of chronic violence and suffering that so many people have been experiencing over time?
Yeah. Well, I think what stands out now is that it's happening to more people, not just Black and Indigenous people. And also what stands out is, I think that more people and other communities of folks outside of Black and Indigenous communities are beginning to understand a little more about what it has meant to occupy a Black Indigenous body here on this land, in this country, in its history. There are things now, there are phrases and words that are becoming popular in our vocabulary now, like defund the police, and white supremacy and privilege and disprivilege and systematic violence. Like, these things are becoming known and studied and circulated, across our communities, particularly white folks who are waking up to this reality, and we're so fortunate at this moment to have this body of literature now. I would say actually this body of media now, books, videos, movies, documentaries, music, art, everything that's actually giving voice to the reality of violence for our community now. So it's like a tipping point, really, and we're getting to a point where it is actually an act of conscious violence to not pay attention to what's happening. Like, there's no excuse now not to know about what's happening.
When we talk about no excuse not to know what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
so many people are feeling rightfully angry.
Mm-hmm.
Angry about either the ambivalence in the past or the failure to be aware in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people are sort of sitting with this anger, sitting with this pain, sitting with this suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we don't often, I should say, have the tools, the right resources to turn to in order to process that anger and that trauma.
Right.
And I'm talking about, in this context, LGBTQ people as an example, who have been marginalized by some faith communities.
Yeah.
So as we think about this pain, this suffering, and this anger, how do we get from a place of despair to a place of hope? How do we get from a place of being completely resigned to it all to getting up to a place of resilience?
One of my core practices is to consume the chaos, is to consume the brokenheartedness, to consume the despair, because the alternative is that it will consume me, And I do that by doing much more than just sitting with it, which I think is like a very common phrase you may hear in my circles, of practice in Buddhism and tantric circles. Oh, we're just going to sit with it. We have to do actually more than sit with it. We have to begin to hold space for it. Holding space for the discomfort means that I begin to consciously notice it and name it, and I say, okay, this is my brokenheartedness. This is my despair, right? And then I want to move into a space of actually learning how to experience this discomfort, because most of us are just reacting, like we feel the discomfort and then we do something. But in this practice and this kind of work, we're noticing and we're learning to experience. What does it feel like in my mind? What does it feel like in my body, right? And that helps me to move deeper and deeper into this experience of, let's say a broken heart. That's actually, we begin to realize that's actually what I call a composite experience. There are just different things happening, right? And when I'm able to experience, I'm able to see it even more deeply, then I'm actually able to start making choices as to how to create this expression or this practice of resiliency. Spaciousness is also a part of this, because when I'm able to experience this discomfort, I'm able to allow more of this discomfort to be in my experience without reacting to it. That makes the energy of these things really fluid and really kind of moving, right? and malleable. You know, if we're just reacting to something, we actually kind of like solidify it. You know, it's like hitting something and punching something, it gets harder and harder and harder. But if we just open, experience, and allow, then I have a lot more space to make different decisions, to be in relationship to that discomfort, you know. And that gives me a lot of clarity to think systematically about how to move into the work of systematically disrupting, you know, the things that are creating the violence from myself, from my community.
And when we talk about systemic change, that's really the work of advocacy. And to a large extent, you would argue, should also be the work of faith. You know, how do we deconstruct systems that have been oppressive and systems that actually should be more welcoming? And you wrote a book called Love and Rage. And many of the things we're talking about is in this book.
Yeah, absolutely.
You talk about the Buddhist principle of doing no violence to oneself or to someone else. And you talked about sort of cultivating self-love and self-compassion as a means of liberation. Right. So people of color, marginalized people, LGBTQ people, we're all living under oppressive systems. And we're fighting to get to that place of liberation. And you talked about this principle and how we get there, because especially now in this time, during COVID-19, we are isolated from our loved ones. We're relatively disconnected in many ways right now. And something that is vital for us to really get through a difficult time is connection. So what kind of advice would you provide to people who are trying to navigate through a really complex time, where they're not able to connect, and where they are still enraged about what's happening outside of their homes?
Absolutely. You know, this self-love that I talk about is really this deep expression of accepting myself, you know, and particularly accepting the things that I habitually struggle with. You know, it's not about covering anything up. It's not about erasing. It's not about transforming. It's just saying, this is a part of me. I'm going to let it be there. And there's a lot of space, again, that opens up around that, you know. But when we're talking about the deep anger that we're experiencing right now, we have to go to the root of that anger, which is the deep hurts. Like, I'm still hurt, right? I'm still disappointed. I'm afraid. I'm terrified. I'm in despair. I'm experiencing a lot of sorrow. And then we begin to tend to that. We begin to take care of that deep discomfort, you know, and we have to understand that, like, this discomfort is also the expressed suffering or discomfort of our collective communities, you know, also of our ancestors as well. It's a composite experience, you know, and so when I am taking care of my brokenheartedness, I'm taking care of the brokenheartedness of my ancestors, of my communities, you know, of Black, Indigenous, you know, and queer communities, right? And it's both individual and collective work. You know, I also have to realize that this is a part, as our community realizes, this is a part of what it means to move through the world embodied in this way, that part of my work is to hold the deep discomfort of being in a world that really is fighting against me being here every single day.
Can you give folks an example of, because I think for some who are coming to this conversation, that all sounds fine in theory. Can you provide an example, either in your life or in the life of someone else who you know, where they were able to really take this sense of pain, suffering, anger, and translate it into empowerment?
Well, I mean, you're looking at an example right here, definitely.
Use yourself.
Yeah. And, you know, and I wrote a whole book that detailed the process from, you know, anger and depression and being shut down to this place of feeling much more liberated, you know. And for me, at the beginning, I had no language for this. In my teens, adolescence, I was like, I'm just pissed. I'm angry. I'm sad, you know. And I thought that the best way to channel this energy was into the work of activism, So I got into activism and service and advocacy work in my teens. Of course, I moved through my 20s doing that work as well. But when I got into my mid-20s, right, I just realized that like I wasn't tending to the hurt, and the hurt was actually beginning to swallow me, to consume me. And I had to get radical in a way that I never dreamed that I would experience radicalism. And that was saying, you know what, I have to stop believing in all the ways the world is trying to tell me that I'm not good enough. We talk about, I was just thinking about this week as I was, preparing for our time together. I was thinking about the It Gets Better campaign, and really thinking about the work of what does it take to save our lives, and for me, it's taken this intense work of learning to be in a relationship with my mind, with my mental states, and it's not easy. Like, this is the thing that I have to communicate over and over again. This didn't happen overnight. This happened over years and years of work, becoming this kind of cliche in a way of like becoming this cliche spiritual seeker, but my path led me into monasteries. It led me into becoming a monk. It led me into retreats. It's led me all over India and Nepal, climbing to tops of mountains to sit with like wise gurus, these enlightened masters. Like, that's how much I wanted to be free. But part of my commitment to the community is saying, you know what, you don't have to go to India, because I have embodied something in an accessible way that I want to share with people in my work, So it takes the commitment to sitting with ourselves, to holding the space, letting our hearts break intentionally, not just like being victims of a brokenheartedness, but allowing our hearts to break, creating practices and systems of care that hold that brokenheartedness, right? And just learning how to move through that brokenheartedness, because that brokenheartedness is doing a couple of things, but primarily it's giving us space to be in this body, to be in this world. And secondly, it's helping us to connect, to empathize with every other being in the world who on some level is experiencing deep discomfort, if not the expression of brokenheartedness.
There are some who would say we use our anger to affect change.
Yes.
Right. Because something has happened in our communities that we are deeply troubled about, we're able to stand up and fight back.
Yeah.
We're able to take that energy and really turn it into action and potential change. What would you say to those who say that is how I use my anger in a positive way to affect change?
Yeah.
And I think that I'm actually doing that in a way that is productive and effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you are using it in a really productive way to get things done, I love that, because I do absolutely believe that we can use our anger to create change, but there's a consequence to using anger in that way that we have to be very careful about, is that the anger itself, the energy of anger, is deeply depleting. It depletes us physically, it depletes us mentally, but always beneath that anger is still that core hurt, so I can go and create change through anger all I want, and I have, absolutely, right? Anger has driven me through some really dark periods in my life to be able to confront violence in a way that I felt has been really effective. But at the end of the day, at the 11th hour, I've always had to come back and to be in a relationship with my brokenheartedness, because that's the space that feels vulnerable. It makes us feel weak. It makes us feel disempowered. And that's a space that's really super uncomfortable for us. Whereas anger is an energetic location that makes us feel super powerful, super energized. But that energy is coming at the expense, of our mental and physical well-being. To put that all into balance, we have to hold the space for our brokenheartedness. The more we hold space for the brokenheartedness, the more I'm able to be in agency with my anger. And when I am in agency with, then I have this beautiful opportunity to consciously direct the energy of anger into ways that I am not perpetuating harm and violence, but I'm using it to benefit myself and to benefit others around me, especially my communities.
When do you think that shows up? So if I'm using anger to affect change, that may seem the more effective route. I can actually see the results, the fruits of my labor fairly soon, some would argue, because you can engage in peaceful protesting. You can exercise your right to protest government action. You could, there are a number of things you can do. And you could potentially see some dramatic changes from that action pretty soon after your engagement. Versus, I think, what you're talking about, something that's a lot more difficult.
Right.
It may take a lot longer to do.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who is looking at the scales and saying, I could either engage in this action now that provides some type of immediate relief, or I can engage in a practice that could take years. And you're telling me that I will feel a lot better as a result of going through this process. What would you say to that person that is looking for the incentive to join you on this journey?
I think what I would say is that I'm interested in the long game. I'm interested in how do I stay sustainable well into the future, not just this moment, and that we can develop a kind of wisdom and clarity that says, you know what, there are certain things that I have to do immediately to create change, but I'm also committed to this long-term work, as well, because the long-term work, of doing this like heavy, deep mental, physical well-being stuff is really what is beginning to transform, to metabolize the mountains of trauma that we're experiencing as a collective. If we do nothing about the trauma, then it will recreate systems of violence. So this is why I always tell people, because this is my experience, let's just say tomorrow, let's just say racism, homophobia, all of that, all these systems of violence are diminished, they disappear. That's wonderful. Like, I will celebrate. However, the trauma hasn't disappeared. So the trauma will recreate these systems if we don't actually address the deep trauma. I would rather the trauma disappear overnight than the systems, because the trauma feeds and perpetuates systems. Racism is just an expression of trauma. Homophobia is just an expression of trauma. Transphobia is an expression of trauma. It's just these cycles of habitual behavior that we get lost in and we keep repeating over and over again. And they don't benefit anyone, but they feel familiar and comfortable, and we don't know anything else because we were all born into the cycle of trauma, right? And so our work, which is what, I think about Stonewall, and I think about Marsha P. Johnson, Silva Rivera, and all those folks at Stonewall that night. They, in that moment, said, we're going to do something different. So there was that immediate choice to say, we're going to use force and violence, and we're going to get into our anger and disrupt this, and we can do that. But they also became the leaders, the mothers of our community who were working to care for the trauma after that moment as well. So we have to do both. And it feels good to head out into the streets, and just be heard and then cuss people out and topple things over. We've all done it. It's great. I was there once in my life, but I also knew that that wasn't actually healing me. It may have been creating systematic space or social space for me to be in, but I had to do deeper work to hold the space for my trauma. And that's what we're not good at. So many of our communities, I would say, the Black, Black, Indigenous, queer spaces, we're just weaponizing trauma over and over and over again. And what my work and the work of many of us now is to disrupt the workings of trauma in our community by learning how to be with the brokenheartedness. We know how to show up to the anger. Now let's show up to the hurts, because that showing up is the emotional labor that we're not just doing for the collective, but we're doing this emotional labor for our ancestors as well, who still rely on us to be free as well.
So Lamara, let's do that. Let's show up
Mhm.
for the hurt. Some folks may not have had an opportunity to engage in practical exercises where you can translate these principles into practice. We've asked you, and you've graciously agreed to lead our viewers through practical exercises that attempt to synthesize this conversation.
Mhm.
So I first want to thank you for doing that. And I really want to thank you for giving us so much of your thinking and your philosophy in this book, and really appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it over to you so you can lead us through a practice for how we might be able to translate some of these principles into action.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I would like to share kind of an abbreviated practice that I write about in Love and Rage. And Love and Rage really embodies many of the practices that I've been alluding to in our session here. I use a practice which is written about in detail in Love and Rage called the 7 Homecomings. The 7 Homecomings are really just the kind of practice that helps me to remember that I'm not alone, right? That I'm always connected and surrounded by beings that love me, right? Teachers and guides and spirits and angels and ancestors. I'm being held by the earth. I'm being taken care of by communities, that I'm a part of. And so I think this is something that we have to continually work on and focus on, all the time, not just, maybe once a day or once a week. Every day I think about the reality that I'm being held and protected, by so many beings around me. So let's begin this practice. And we're going to spend about 20 minutes. We're going to move a little quickly through this, but again, this is all written about in Love and Rage as well, so you can get a copy of that and review this practice. So we'll begin our practice by just allowing our bodies to come into a position that feels appropriate for us. So standing up, lying down, sitting in a chair, lounging, whatever feels appropriate. And when I say appropriate, I mean allow your body to come into a position that feels balanced in terms of holding comfort and discomfort, right? Honoring and recognizing that for many of us, our bodies will never be comfortable, or at least there'll be a scale of comfort over our lives. But just in this moment, recognizing that and saying, you know what, I can hold the space for all the sensations that arise in this moment. This is the beginning of this kind of liberatory practice, is kindness to our bodies, accepting our bodies, acknowledging that all of our bodies have different stories of trauma, and it's okay. It's okay. And then joining me in turning your attention to your breath, right? And just noticing the breath just for a few moments, just noticing the in breath and the out breath, breathing in whatever way, again, is appropriate for you. And now shifting your attention to what I call the heart center. And this is right in the middle of the chest here. Noticing the weights of your body, the sensation of your hand, making contact with your chest if you choose to bring your palm up to your chest. And if you can, imagine breathing in and out of the heart center. And so when I'm inhaling deep into the heart center, I just feel the heart center just expanding, filling with air. And as I exhale, I'm just noticing how the heart center just contracts. Just one more breath. And so the heart center is also this area that we call the heart chakra, right? And so in the heart chakra is this energy this energy center, one of the energy centers in the body that is really associated with feeling and empathy and compassion and love. And this is, for some of us, can feel really constricted, really shut down, because many of us are just exhausted, emotionally exhausted, deeply traumatized from the ways in which our openness and vulnerability has created suffering and violence for us. And so we shut down and we numb this part of ourselves. So the in breath is getting us to open. But we're going to go a step further, and I invite you to begin to reflect on gratitude, right? Beginning to reflect on all the acts of love and kindness and labor that countless beings around us have offered us, that have ensured our well-being, that have ensured that we have our basic needs met. So allowing the energy of gratitude to awaken, feeling the heart center expand and open, slowly just begins. It's almost like there's a crust on the heart center, right? And it just begins to open. We feel the vulnerability. We begin to touch deeper into this truth that we're dependent on others around us, and how moving it is that so many beings are working for our well-being, and have always worked for our well-being, and will continue to work for our well-being until the day that we die. Even for those of us who are experiencing a lot of violence, a lot of marginalization, there are still acts of kindness and labor that others are doing for us. And sometimes we have no idea who or what's doing anything. But if we are alive right now, then we are the recipient of kindness and labor. So allowing this energy to really begin to fill up your experience. And I wonder what it would be like for you to allow yourself to be held by this energy of gratitude. There's so much to be ungrateful for. In this moment, I invite you to be grateful for something or someone. And if you can, if you're able to, imagine that this energy of gratitude begins to radiate from our heart centers, like this radiance of white light. And this radiance of white light begins to fill the space up around us, right? And this radiance, this glow of gratitude begins to really cleanse the space that we're sitting in. It warms the space in a way, it brightens the space, it blesses the space. And in this space, we will slowly begin to invite what I call the 7 homecomings. And we turn our minds first to inviting the first homecoming. The first homecoming is really reflecting on and inviting any being in our life who has ever been a teacher for us, or a guide, or an elder, or a mentor, a religious figure, a spiritual figure in our lives whom we've gone to for help, for love, for advice, for teaching, for clarity. Inviting those beings to come and sit with us in this space. And these beings can be people, they can be spirits, they can be deities, they can be your understanding of God, or the mother, or whatever is appropriate for you. So inviting those beings to come and sit in the space around us, just imagining that. You don't have to see anything, you don't have to know who these beings are, but just saying welcome. As they come and sit, it's like coming home, to being held. by their intense kindness and love for us. And now we move to our second homecoming, and this is coming home to what I call sacred texts and wisdom texts. And this is any texts, both metaphorically and figuratively, that has been a source of clarity for us. So any scriptures, or books, or quotes, or ideas, or philosophies that have been really important for us in understanding love for ourselves, understanding liberation, whatever has been important for you. But this also includes arts, right? Performance, visual, dance, acting, poetry. We're inviting the energy of these texts into the space because they inspire us. They help us to experience love and wisdom. So inviting that energy, and we're coming home to being held by these wisdom texts. And next we turn our attention to our third homecoming. And this homecoming is coming home to our communities. So inviting those communities into this space where we experience love, or this deep wish for us to be happy and to be free from suffering. And we invite the same communities who allow us to return love back to the community as well, where we're able to wish for the happiness and the freedom of that community in the same way that community has wished for our happiness and freedom. We invite those groups to come and sit with us in this space, to begin to hold space for the circle as well that's beginning to form. And we also invite an aspiration to one day be a part of an authentic community as well. If we don't feel like we're connecting to communities, invite this aspiration. The aspiration will draw us into a community one day. And the fourth homecoming is two parts. The first part of the homecoming is our ancestors, right? So inviting the ancestors who are committed to our well-being, to our benefit. We're inviting those ancestors into the space. And we don't have to know who they are. They know who we are. So we open our hearts and we open this intention and we invite them just to be with us, to sit with us. And secondly, we invite our lineages. You know, our lineages are these continuums and communities of beings who have made it possible for us to do the thing that we love to do in our lives. So great lineages of artists and activists and thinkers, right? We invite our queer lineages, our trans lineages. We invite all of them to come and sit with us in the circle around us. And next, we invite the earth as the fifth homecoming, and we just acknowledge the land, the earth under us, knowing and connecting to the reality that the earth is always holding us. And if the earth is always holding us, it is always loving us. And in this moment, we can acknowledge the land that we're practicing and sitting on and living on right now. You know, who did this land belong to? What was it called? Who were the communities who took care of this land before colonizers and settlers appropriated the land? Acknowledging the land and letting the land hold us in this moment. This is the fifth homecoming. We turn our minds to the sixth homecoming now, which is silence. So allowing ourselves to acknowledge the silence around us, seeing silence not as something that's trying to erase us or to silence us, but seeing silence as something that's trying to offer a space to be with ourselves. That silence becomes a kind of a mirror that reflects ourselves back to ourselves so we can do this profound work of tending to ourselves. And lastly, the seventh homecoming is ourselves, is me, is you, sitting within the middle of this profound circle of care that has emerged in our practice. Allowing ourselves to be here as the ultimate act of kindness and love for ourselves, we allow our bodies and our minds to show up, to be present in this moment. And we have this circle around us, this homecoming circle, or the circle of care with our teachers and guides and mentors and communities and our ancestors and lineages, right? And the earth is under us, holding us. We have the energy of our wisdom texts deeply inspiring us. We have silence, creating space for us to be deep in this practice right now. And so slowly we begin to imagine that the circle of care around us begins to radiate this energy of deep care into the circle around us. And this deep care can feel like love or compassion. It can feel like being seen. Maybe we can remember the last time or one point in our lives where we felt so deeply cared for and loved and safe. And maybe that is the energy that we begin to imagine our circle radiating into the space around us, reminding us that we do have the capacity to be cared for, and allowing this energy to really wrap around us to take care of us. And slowly this energy begins to seep, to penetrate into our bodies, slowly seeping into the skin, our muscles, into our bones, into our tissue, into our blood and our bloodstream, where it begins to circulate throughout our whole bodies. And slowly we are deeply saturated with this energy of care. Then we turn our attention to parts of our experience that feel heavy, that feel like suffering. Maybe our fear, or our numbness, or exhaustion, or sorrow. Whatever feels appropriate for you, noticing it, turning your attention to it and saying, there you are. So we notice it, and we name it. And we experience it. What does this feel like? And then once you feel it, we can begin to let go of it. And when I say let go, I mean we can then begin to imagine that this energy of care that's circulating through our body, that we imagine that we offer this discomfort into this energy of care that's circulating through our bodies. And we let this energy that's radiating into our bodies begin to hold the brokenheartedness. So I don't feel as if I have to hold it or I have to be with it. I just offer it into the care from my circle of benefactors, my homecoming circle. And I let it go. And I let this energy take care of it. And so slowly we'll begin to transition out of the practice. I encourage you to do that by first just actually shifting your attention to noticing the weight of your body on the seat under you. Using the sensation of the weight of the body and the seat to really ground your attention to something solid and heavy. We turn our attention back to our circle of care around us. We thank this circle of care for holding us, for always protecting us, and we ask them to continue to protect us. Slowly we begin to imagine that it begins to, and they begin to dissolve into white light. And that white light, I imagine, is being absorbed into my heart center. And in appreciation, I thank the seat for holding me. I thank my body for being a vehicle for this practice. I thank my breath for supporting me. I thank my mind for being an expression of really realization and enlightenment. I thank all the communities that I'm a part of that supports me in doing the work of liberation and care. So coming back into the space and just awakening the body up to just a few simple movements. Okay. Just stretching, whatever is appropriate for you, taking care of the body in whatever way feels appropriate. Okay. And thank you for your practice. Thank you for your time in the practice.
Thank you, Lamarad. Just thank you both, you and Alfonso, for such a powerful conversation, but thank you for the gift of this practice and sharing your spiritual tradition with us and providing us with the tools we need to be present in this moment and to press on in the work of liberation and care for self and for neighbor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Of course. Of course. Thank you to all of our viewers for joining us in this space. We hope that it has served you to nourish and sustain you. If you would like to dive deeper into the work and teaching of Lamarad Owens, I highly recommend his book, Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger. And we are running a giveaway until this Friday, October 9th, for 5 copies of Lamarad's book. And you can enter to win one. The link is on the scrolling thing below, but it's also hrc.im/love and rage book. Again, it's hrcim/love and rage book. And for more information about the Religion Faith program and more events like this one, you can text faith to 472-472 or go to hrc.org/religion. Once again, thank you all for joining us. My prayer is we would be able to press on and to hope on and to love on and fight on until all are free. Thank you again and take care.